Hello and welcome to the NonProfit World TV show. I'm your host, Donna Hagiga, and today we have on our show Peter Faulk from Sober World. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Very nice to meet you as well. I was very interested to hear about Sober World, and I was hoping you could tell me a little bit about it so our viewers could learn about what you've been able to do with Sober World after the last 3 years and what has inspired you to create it.
Okay. Well, Sober World is a nonprofit community that I created about almost 3.5 years ago now. It's based out of my personal experiences in recovery, and as I was going through my own recovery process, I came to understand about the magnitude of the issue of alcohol addiction, and I looked at the recovery community, and I eventually determined that they're doing a great job. If you have needs and get into that group, they do a really fantastic job with everybody that comes through there. Mm-hmm. But there's a large swath of people that are really struggling, and there's a lot of impact to society overall that isn't really being addressed by anything or anybody. There's a lot of groups that work individually on different segments. Mm-hmm. There's different people that work on the fiscal side of things, and just I see a lot of different struggle with legislation and a lot of different ways. But what I came to come up with Sober World was kind of an overall arching awareness of the global issues. And not long after I started doing that, started doing a lot of reading, started generating a website, posting on a corresponding Facebook site, I learned of World Health Organization initiatives where they actually have what they call the 2025 initiative, is to reduce all non-communicable diseases across the board. Mm-hmm. By certain percentages, tobacco, fatty foods, sugars, and alcohol being one of them. Mm-hmm. They want to reduce the overall impact in terms of years of death and the death mortality rate, which is at the time that they were looking at it, was about 3.3 million people globally dying from alcohol-related causes. Is
that per year?
That's per year.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So they wanted to, it's a very modest reduction they're looking for. In 10 years, they're only looking to drop that down 10%. Mm-hmm. So roughly, they want to get it down to 3 million people a year dying.
Saved. Less, or get down to, okay.
Down
wow,
to 3 million,
okay.
from 3.3 down to 3.
Sure.
They only want a 10% reduction in that. Mm-hmm. So, which is it's a pretty staggering number. And so, but just, the death toll is only a very small part of the overall impact of alcohol on society. Mm-hmm. Even when you just look at the fiscal impact, you just think about just straight money, it makes really no sense whatsoever. You hear states saying, oh, we've got all this great alcohol tax revenue. Mm-hmm. Well, the World Health Organization in the year 2000 did a survey. They go around country by country, and they take a look at the overall impact. You look at the punitive, the costs for jail, healthcare costs, the cost for your taxes, because every time there's a DUI accident, we're all paying for it. There's a fire truck and police and responders, and we all pay for all of those services. And all of those costs combined in the year 2000, when they last looked at the United States, were in the neighborhood of $225 billion, so it's with a B. And the total collected revenue all around for every single state combined was about $10 billion with a B.
Right.
So in round numbers, for every dollar in tax revenue we get for every single state, it's $20 in expense and soft costs.
Double that. So,
and so on top of all of the hurt, the harm, I'm sure everybody knows somebody with something that's related to alcohol.
So it sounds to me as though your real mission here is really to be a curator of information, whether it's fiscal, legislative, I'm guessing help as well, information for those people who aren't already sort of active members of the recovery community. Is that some of the goal? Yeah,
correct. Every single day, I read through probably neighborhood of 15 to 20 different articles I receive through Google search bots. And I have probably about 20 different topics that I search articles on. They range anywhere. There's a lot of issues recently about the college communities, both some good and so there are some positive signs, but there's still a lot of negative activity. Legislation. I even look at the marketing side of it. So we try to understand, where the alcohol companies are trying to gain market share and how they're doing it, like selling alcohol into a lot of different areas, like grocery stores, and how they psychologically turn what is, in essence, the base component behind alcohol is, if you wiki it, it's literally, they describe it as rocket fuel. The C2H6O is, they'll talk about it being used as a biological cleaner. It kills everything. It can be used in rocket fuel. It can be used as automotive fuel. And then they talk about human consumption. So it's kind of ironic the way that they describe it.
Yes.
You start going, boy, would I ever really want to drink that? But when you realize it, that stuff diluted is beer, wine, everything that's out on the marketplace.
Yeah, it certainly does reframe it in a powerful way, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So eventually I came up with, after about a year or two of doing that, I was looking at all of the different ways that people justify doing what they do and trying to come up with a message that you really can't tell people to stop. There has to be a willingness there. That was very, very dearly learned in the recovery community. You see people come in and go out, and they just, like, if they don't have that willingness, they just don't grasp the program. So I learned that. And the laws don't work. So we tried prohibition. I see that happening in little pockets of activity. In India, there's a little state about the size of Ohio that's doing prohibition within India, and so they're struggling, with things, and they're trying prohibition, like we did, and that's not going to probably have the same overall result that we did. So I eventually came up to a simple question. There's a great movie called The Many Faces, One Voice, The Anonymous People. It's a movie about the recovery community, and that group is trying to take the 20-some-odd million people that are in recovery in the United States. It's about 8% of the population in some way, shape, or form, either in recovery or affected by alcohol or drugs. And they're banding together just to get, among other things, the primary focus of that group is to get health care. So when the health care was going through and they were chopping everything out, the recovery community was one of the first ones to hit because it's an anonymous community. They were like, well, who's here to represent?
Speak for us.
Yeah,
Sure,
and like,
right.
well, anybody from addiction? Okay, that goes first off the list. So that group banded together to get health care for the group. But as part of that movie, one of the things they talked about was another drug, cocaine. So in the late 60s, there was a tremendous movement, awareness. They had gentlemen like Dick Van Dyke, they had Buzz Aldrin, and all sorts of very, very famous people that were elevating alcohol and building all this awareness. But shortly thereafter, cocaine came through, and it started with the Nixon era, then it went into Bush #1, and then eventually into Nancy Reagan and that whole Just Say No campaign.
Yes.
So they talk about that Just Say No campaign in that movie, and what that campaign did psychologically. It was a very difficult time because cocaine was a very new and very aggressive and very, very toxic drug. A lot of money, a lot of hurt, a lot of pain. But psychologically, what it did is it turned anything that was illegal at that point, bad drugs. Anything that was not illegal, good drugs.
Yes.
So, Just Say No is very harsh and very punitive, and it put a lot of people in jail. Many of them are still in jail today. There were 3 strikes law, if you remember that. So there was crack cocaine, straight cocaine, and a lot of struggles
So would you say that one of the goals of that campaign was to target alcohol abuse, or do you think it was not because it was not a controlled substance?
No, because they were specifically targeting that drug, and what eventually came out of that was it's okay if it's legal.
Yes, right.
But if it's not legal, we're going to just say no. We're going to throw you in jail.
Right.
And for a long time, because that's a bad drug.
Right.
And the way I look at it is that any drug that you take, there really sort of needs to be a reason why you take it.
Or perhaps any substance that's that can be viewed as an addictive substance, right?
Correct. Well, I just look at overall drugs in general. Like I created one image at one point where I put a bottle of NyQuil and a bottle of vodka next to each other.
Right.
And it has the warning label on it on the NyQuil. It says use only as prescribed, only when you need it. Well, I think of alcohol as the same way, where you have a bad day, and it's kind of and you want to just go and relax and chill back with a glass of wine. People do that all the time. But when you have 2 bad days in a row, or 3 bad days, or you get a new boss, or you get a whole bunch of extra work dumped on you, and then you've got life stress, and then you find yourself doing that consistently over and over and over, day after day, week after week, and then that develops into a dependency, and then maybe eventually an addiction, and then the more you do the alcohol, you wake up the next day late for work, so you get in trouble, and so then you get that into that snowball effect.
Right.
So the way I eventually started to look at all drugs is, why do you need to take this? NyQuil, you have a cold. A little bit of alcohol, you have a temporary problem, and most times the temporary problem goes away and you're fine. But if you find yourself repeatedly consuming it, day in and day out, week after week, day after day, it's at some level, then it becomes, there's all sorts of labels for it, and I try not to get into the labels, but what I try to do, and long way around, I'm getting to my focal point, is I came up with the question of, instead of just say no, I came up with just ask why. So the eventual goal of Sober World is to take that campaign, the Just Ask Why campaign, and do something very similar and have it go out as sort of a national campaign, and encourage people to just look at anything that they do that kind of as the recovery community, because it says anything that makes your life unmanageable. Where I'm doing too much of any one thing, it's just like, well, why am I doing that? And it could even be something as innocuous and simple as, I'm playing golf too much. Well, why are you playing golf? Well, I'm escaping from household chores or some stress with a marriage or something like that.
Right.
So it could be anything, but anything that takes you off of your norm, adds stress to your life, or takes you away from things that you should be doing, or get to the point where it's addiction, which is a much more serious thing, obviously. I encourage that, there's just the why question. What is knocking you off of your norm, your calmness, and your basis? So.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful question to ask. Why? What is bringing you to this decision point of, should I take this drink, or that sort of thing. You spoke a little bit with me beforehand about the spiritual element of what you're doing as well. And I know that a lot of times people in the spiritual community or different spiritual communities, I'm thinking of Buddhism right now, they talk about, that suffering happens in every life and we should just accept that. And sometimes I think we see that we're taking addictive substances or abusing them, let's say, because we want to numb those feelings and not feel that suffering. And that, I think, goes to your point of the just say why. What did you want to add about the spiritual element of what you're doing?
Well, the basis behind the core most successful and most replicated program is a spiritual recovery and awakening. And what I found that it's that spiritual component, and there's a difference between spirituality and religion. You know, spirituality is your own sense of inner calmness and inner being. And I actually talk about on the soberworld.org website is I kind of redefine sobriety as not anything that related to alcohol specifically, but it's more of a state of calmness, a state of inner peace. It's a spiritual condition, and it's, you know, when you have a sense of spirituality and a sense of being, I'll share one quick story. Early on in my recovery, I actually went and talked with a minister, and I described what was going on in my personal voyage, and he went like this. He said, we all aspired towards something. And he said, if you think about everybody all around the planet for thousands and thousands of years, we all have some sort of God. And we all just innately want to be part of some sort of greater collective and higher being. We all worship something. It's our inner spirituality. It's our innate desire to be part of a greater collective. And I was sharing with you earlier, so what I'm seeing is what I try to do is look at the global aspect of all of the issues that are happening from all of the research that I've done over the years, and you know, literally thousands of articles. But I also look at time. And you know, I think about what are we doing today that we're going to look back 100 years and go, wow, that was kind of silly. But when you look back 100 years prior, you look at Prohibition and how that failed dismally. But you also look at, in the last 100 years, we've had some very, very unique things happen with our culture that have changed us significantly as human beings. And a lot of it is affecting our spirituality. And part of it is, you know, year-over-year growth of alcohol sales globally. It's now, you know, hundreds of billions of dollars globally. There's some amazingly large firms. But there are other aspects to clutter your connection with your spirituality. Something as simple as movies. A lot of escapism in movies. There are now tens of thousands of movies that have never been there before the last 100 years. So people are escaping into movies. Now you have the internet. Now you have the cell phones. You have 100 some odd TV channels to go into. You have all these different apps.
So hard to be unplugged, so to speak.
Yeah, so, but all of those things combined not only distract you from your spirituality and your connection with your higher power, but they also disconnect from this type of conversation.
Sure.
So you have, you know, kids sitting there right next to each other, texting each other.
Or we could be trying to have a conversation, but meanwhile you're answering and I'm looking at my phone to see what that last message was, right? Right,
exactly. I was watching an interesting 60 Minutes article a couple nights ago, and they were literally talking about how they intentionally disrupt or try to disrupt you and create, and they know the chemistry in the brain, where they create applications that want to stimulate that burst of dopamine.
To keep you coming back.
Yeah, and to create that tension and that anxiety. So you have all of these devices and apps and things like that creating dopamine, creating anxiety, and then you're escaping in movies and you're escaping in television, and we're doing all of these things and we're not getting outside as much as we used to. And so all of these things combined, and then you heap on top of it a society that has allowed creep of alcohol exponentially. So when I grew up in north central Connecticut here, package stores were 40 hours a week.
Right, now.
And so at 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon, I look back at my hometown, you could get alcohol maybe 1 or 2 locations in a restaurant somewhere. I counted about a year ago, and there were over 30 locations at 2 o'clock on
Sure.
a Sunday afternoon.
So now it's so embedded in our culture.
It's a very, very normal thing. So it's and we have a system where the states all compete against each other for customers along the borders.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Where New Hampshire competes nationally. They say we're the cheapest booze in the country, so
Sure.
we'll ship anywhere.
Right. Right.
And they have some of the most serious addiction and problems with youth drinking and alcohol in New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire, right.
Yeah, I do a lot of work with them.
So you've been able to build Sober World, the website, and the Facebook presence for 3 years now. Mm-hmm. What's the engagement been like, and what do you see as the future of Sober World?
So the engagement, it's funny because I would think it would be more. People would get more upset about things, and it's actually, the engagement is kind of sad. Like some of the things I'll share on my personal page, and I'll get 70 likes when you post a picture of a cute animal or your kids.
Sure.
And you post something about, some really disturbing things about 75% of this college, they identified alcohol as being the root cause of 75% of all the rapes. Mm-hmm. Fraternities, there was one recently where, only 3% of the students were in fraternities, but 50% of the rapes were part of that. And so there's a lot of issues with fraternities and things that are happening currently. Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of things happen, but there's still very much I can't talk about that.
I don't want to go there.
Yeah, there's that stigma, and there's
Show me more kittens.
Yeah, it's, and I've been conditioned to talk very openly and honestly about these things, and not that I don't care, but I don't care. I have.
And why is that? Why is it that you do feel it's so needed that you are this confident and able to be out there and be a spokesperson and educate the world? Why is it that you feel confident doing that, and you feel so many other people from the recovery community sort of want to live a little bit more in the shadows?
It's the ingrained stigma, and when I do in Sober World, I don't touch the recovery community or really promote that at all. I'll point out cool things that happen, like a college. I posted an article recently about a college that created a recovery dorm, and so you look
innovations are something that you want to celebrate.
So they were talking about this was I think it was Temple in Pennsylvania. They were putting together a whole college dorm, talking about it be drug and alcohol free, and they were talking about it being a recovery dorm. And I looked at that and I said, well, that shouldn't be a recovery dorm, that should be a normal dorm.
Yes, right.
And we look at, as we've grown so accustomed to, everyone shows up at a party and they want to consume the toxic carcinogen, level 1 carcinogen, addictive rocket fuel. They're all looking for that, and everyone's like, great, we're at a party, now I can escape.
Yeah. Yes, right.
And I've been very, very fortunate in that I had a very deep, dark, painful experience, but that triggered such an intense connection and a spiritual connection. That I've experienced both sides, the heavy medicating and the heavy non-medicating, and I see the complete dichotomy and the difference between the two, and it's just such an amazing experience being on this side of it, and how much calmer, how much more relaxed I am. Focus, sleep better, save money. There's all these tremendous advantages to it, but I was so used to doing all of that, and I was so told that was the norm, where you show up at a party and here you go. It's immediately, it's the thing to do. And I get that, and I understand that, and that's the way we are, but I just ask why now. It's like, well, why is it that way? And it boils down to, it's simple economics. You have companies that are out there that legally can produce and sell this product, so they're doing everything they possibly can to gain market share and grow. I'll share a couple quick stories about growth, like grocery stores. Two issues with grocery stores.
Well, back when I was growing up, they didn't used to be able to sell.
Yeah,
beer and
it's
wine,
so,
right?
yeah, pretty much most every state when we were growing up, alcohol was not in the grocery stores. And then they just allowed beer. And then, then they go state by state and literally county by county. And they just push and say, well, we got beer, can we do wine too? People are buying that. They want to be able to select their wine and not have to go to the package store.
Right.
And then actually a good percentage of the states actually have hard liquor sales in with the beer and wine. And now you have like the super stores, all have their own liquor stores
box,
next
yep.
to it. The huge
Sure.
box stores have their discounted liquors.
Right, with that separate entrance. And
Yeah, yeah. But I was reading an article in, it was in New Jersey, and the legislation was talking, and they were trying to convince the people that we should put wine in the grocery stores. And the liquor stores were like, no, we can't do that. We'll lose sales. And they said, well, no, you'll be fine. And they pointed to Massachusetts. And so they said, well, what do you mean? And so they said, well, when you go look at the Massachusetts, what happened is they started selling wine in all the grocery stores.
Right.
And the package store sales maintained.
Still worse.
And they gained an extra, I forget, it was 12, 15, $18 million in revenue on top of that. So that's however many hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. So I'm a marketing guy. I go,
Right.
okay, well that's a new market. They tapped into, because they maintained existing sales and they had sales
Sure.
growth
Right.
from different people. So I said, well, who goes to the grocery stores?
Right.
Well, that's your stay-at-home parents
Right.
and seniors for the most part.
People who weren't necessarily focused to just go to a package store, but now that it's there at the grocery store, it's like,
convenient.
oh, let me pick that up too.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So that they've been able to gain market share and growth and not affect the other
Just
ones.
by being visible.
So I was reading that article in New Jersey, and they were using that to justify. I said, well, wait a minute, that's a huge issue, because now you have parents
Right.
that are out there, buying diapers and things like that, and a bottle of wine,
Right.
and put that in with all blip, 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 and blip.
Right. Right.
And then, okay, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon, kids won't be home for an hour, I'll have a glass of wine or two.
And now I think, at least in Connecticut, restaurants will allow you to take the rest of your bottle of wine home from a restaurant.
Yeah, yeah. So they keep on, pushing. I call it creep. It's creepy. But one of the other interesting and fascinating things that I was reading articles on was they were talking about putting food labels on alcohol. And they came at it and says, you know what, we know that, alcohols have calories, we'll admit that, and they have sugars. And so as part of your dietary thing, as you're going through the grocery stores, you can pick your foods, and as you grab your wine, you'll know the number of calories. So you can figure out how much of that you can have as part of your diet. Seems innocuous, but psychologically what they've done is they've taken a level 1 addictive carcinogen toxic drug and turned it into a food product.
Right, right.
So that, and I've even seen they have sports drinks where they created an alcoholic version of the sports drink. It looks pretty much exactly the same,
Really?
same type of bottle.
Wow.
So you can walk around the beach, look like you're drinking.
Yes.
And so their marketing is literally like walking around the beach, and you can look like you're not.
You're training, but you're actually
getting wasted.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
you're or you're hiding it from. It's not supposed to be on the beach, but it looks like you're drinking.
Right.
So whatever the reasoning behind it, but I just see so many of those with all the thousands of articles. I see so many different ways that they creatively come at and approach. And one of the interesting things I saw in the 80s, the trend was wine coolers.
Yes.
Bartles and James.
Bartles and James, right.
So what happened when that product came out, the wine coolers came out, the alcohol industry saw, wow, there was like a spike in sales. And they're like, well, who's buying this? Well, it's not the guys, it's the women.
Right.
And they said, well, wait a minute, we've been missing out on half of a market here.
Right.
So since the 80s, they've been heavily, heavily targeting women. with all of these fruity rum drinks and cool-looking drinks and blue wine for moms.
They don't talk about the calories in those, though, do they?
Yeah, well, it's just a general targeting towards women, and so they've got chocolate wine, cupcake wine. One of the most disturbing ones I've seen is it's called Mommy's Timeout wine.
Oh, right. I've seen that too, yes.
And so that's literally, if you think about it psychologically, it's saying, okay, young mother, your child's sleeping, have a few drinks and get drunk.
Right.
Which is, it's a very, very slippery slope. Right. And and quite frankly, the fastest growing issues for white women, one of the fastest growing DUI groups is white women, and incarceration is white women in the United States. There are so many DUIs and so many incarcerations, and as you would expect, there's a fast growing pool of children winding up in foster homes also because of that.
Do you also see, have you seen anything in terms of your market research about what happens to communities of color with the marketing of alcohol to them, for instance? I know that I've seen different types of alcohol being marketed.
Yeah, some of that is actually embedded in music. Rappers will get bonuses for mentioning specific brands and labels.
Oh, so it's like
so they'll talk about get your
product placement,
get your Hennessy and your whatever in the rap song.
Right.
This is a G-rated show. I won't go there.
Right.
But yeah, you do see some of that, and you have targeted market in every which way, shape, or form.
Speaking of music, I understand that you are also a musician.
Yep.
Do you have any opportunities when you're out playing at all these different venues to talk or educate at all about what you're doing with Sober World?
Yeah, actually, here in New England, there are a couple major festivals. I've actually been donating coffee to both of them for a little while. One is Memorial Day weekend coming up in New Hampshire, called the Half Moon Sober Fest. That's somewhere around 1,000 people or so that go and camp for the weekend. A few dozen groups, and another one happens Memorial Day weekend. That is at a I think it's still a Mohegan Sun-owned scouting reservation northeast of Massachusetts, and that's a little bit bigger. It's a few thousand people that camp all up in the fields, and they have again, it's a start at noon on Sunday and go all weekend festival.
And do you actually play at this festival as well?
Yeah, I've played with different groups, yeah, it's interesting because as a musician, so much of music revolves around bars. And so, so I play with different people in different groups. I go everywhere from, I play with a couple of ministers where we play, sober houses and no free shelters, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where I play with some young kids and we're playing in bars. And there I'm more of a mentor, and with the other guys I'm more of a peer. But what I try to do is, in any environment, I just try to learn. I don't get upset at any one thing. I just try to learn, okay, what, their struggles and their struggles in different ways. They've gotten bit by it. They're getting bit by it.
It's that just ask why, but try to understand.
Right. Why did you get so far? Or more on that side, it's how can my experience help you get out of that? And here it's more like I've had people come up and say, hey, I need to buy you a drink. I was like, no, I'm good.
Yes.
And they're like, well, you don't drink. I said, no. And so, I've had dialogue like that where people come up and it's like, well, how come you don't drink? I said, well, I'm just, and then I share my card and what I do. And, and I don't really promote too much other than the website and what I do. I think the best promotion is more about walking the walk, and having it being part of your life on any given day.
It also sounds, though, that you're combining your sort of professional strength of marketing, and taking that and making Sober World the website and the Facebook page, and really making that your purpose to use that strength to educate or to inform or provide resources for people. right?
Yeah, the eventual goal, early on I thought of the Paul Newman business model of for-profit coffee company and a non-for-profit, supporting each other, kind of like Paul Newman did that. And when I first started my journey, I was focusing on the coffee. So I need to sell coffee to do this.
What gave you the idea to do coffee?
Well, it's obviously with the recovery community, but the coffee, my target market for coffee was a little bit different, where I was just going to sell it over the web and target specifically just kind of I call it church coffee. It's just your basic breakfast blend, 15 cent a cup coffee, and offer it out to, I didn't really want to promote it to the recovery communities, but if they wanted it, that's great. But more talk about it and head into the church and religious community, because they quite frankly house a lot of
these meetings.
Well, they host the meetings, but even beyond the meetings, they see the impact. So a lot of times when you get people that are in serious trouble, they'll go talk to the ministers. And ministers, they marry people, they divorce, they see people who get divorced, and they see the alcohol and they see the issues related to it. So anything that they can do to help support something that would have an impact and try to help mitigate the impact of alcohol, or build awareness and help people with just a simple question. Just ask why. And also promotes general spirituality. And it promotes that as a solution, because so many people I've seen through the recovery community, eventually they get that, what's called the spiritual awakening, and they feel that warmth, and it's like, wow, that's nice, so nice to have that craziness gone. It's nice to be, deep breath, I sleep well at night, everything's good, I'm relaxed. And eventually they crave, well, let me go dabble back in religion again. And then they'll go find a church box to fit in.
Spiritual house or something.
Right, right. So, but it's getting that spirituality back, and the recovery program is a very God-centric spirituality program, but that's the strength that you get through to get through all of the stuff, all of the demons in your mind is through spirituality.
So you were mentioning that it's very God-centric. Is it multi-denominational, or does it tend to be?
The recovery community is pretty much anybody, anywhere, they don't care. It's the one thing you do when you walk into those rooms is they just want to love you and take care of you. They don't care.
Now,
which is a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. I understand that you came up with the name Bill's Blend after the founder of one of the major recovery programs.
Yep, Bill Wilson. It was just kind of a fun nod to him, because he was pretty, Bill and Bob, both pretty amazing individuals to come up with this spiritually based program. And the whole 12-step recovery program is actually it's driven out of the Bible. There's actually recovery programs that loop the Bible eventually back into it. But they intentionally made it so that it was really open to anybody, any faith, religion, sex, gender, whatever. They don't care.
How is Bill's Blend Coffee? How are you marketing that? How are you getting to these spiritual houses?
I actually have not been focusing on the coffee side of it yet. I started on that, but I came to understand I didn't understand. I was like, well, I need to sell this coffee to promote. What am I promoting?
Right.
And that journey, I figured, okay, well, I'll take a couple weeks and figure that out. And it's been a couple of years.
Sure.
And I'm still, the whole technology side of things and adding that layer of understanding of the dopamine addiction and the cell phones and all of that, I really haven't layered into the message that a lot of those things drive the tension and anxiety that will cause you to, it's part of the whole big picture of your overall health that will cause you to say, I need a glass of wine, man, I just need to relax, or I need a beer.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to collectively understand all of the different things so that when I put together the overall comprehensive message, it really takes into scope all of the different things that are affecting us, so that you may be. I was at one point where this thing would go off and I'd be like literally like that. My nerves were so shot.
On edge, right?
Yeah. So that as people understand, well, if that's bothering you, that's a problem. Or if your email goes off.
It's a little bit of a Pavlovian thing almost,
right.
like where you feel like, oh, I got to do something with that,
Yeah.
right? So I wanted to ask you, certainly there are a lot of other substances that are sort of in the forefront of news, opioid addiction, heroin addiction, certainly you mentioned earlier, cocaine addiction, there's other ones. What do you think can be taken from what's working in the recovery community from alcohol abuse? What do you think is some of that can be sort of applied and hopefully get some successes?
Well, I guess the core message is about looking at yourself, checking your own tensions and anxieties, and it's really hard to measure yourself because it's hard to benchmark, like, how do I feel today and how should I be feeling? Well, I don't know how I should be feeling. I've always felt this way.
Sure. Right.
So if I can't say, well, here's a different color, ooh, wow, I want to be like that. Well,
right.
That's easy to say, but hard to show somebody. You can tell somebody, but until they have the motivation to really want to get there, it's hard. So I guess alcohol is legal because it kills you so very slowly. And it's kind of innocuous, but we are finding out all the different cancers that are related to it. And I eventually see it heading down the path as cigarettes, where it will eventually, somebody will wave the flag and say, hey, this is causing, every organ that it touches, prostate, colon, pancreas, liver, stomach, mouth, esophagus, all of those, it causes cancer, a little bit more based on volume. In women, it causes cancer in the breast due to more of a hormonal imbalance. So you can drink very moderately and still elevate your risk for breast cancer, just because every time you drink it messes with the hormones, and that's the trigger for the free radicals that causes breast cancer.
Right.
So back to your question about the different drugs, the opioids, heroin, a much more immediate and intense addiction.
So long-term, alcohol, you were saying long-term, these are very, very intense.
You have to consume a very lot of alcohol to get to the point where you have a physical addiction. You can have a psychological addiction relatively quickly.
Sure.
But those are a little bit easier. But when you get to the point where you're like this,
yes,
and you've skin's crawling, from not having alcohol in your system. It takes a lot to get there. But the opioids are catching a lot of people by surprise because they're so powerful. And I think that they're just understanding that they've been overprescribing them. But it's been having an overall impact. I've been donating time and coffee to Hope for New Hampshire Recovery. I met them at one of the music festivals in New Hampshire.
And what do they treat?
They are kind of an overarching organization that builds awareness and talks to the legislation about getting money for the individual centers, and so they deal with the legislators and say, hey, we need beds, we need money, we've got all these groups, and we've got this many people, so they build awareness of that.
Okay.
And when I met them 3 years ago, all the talk was about alcohol. And so I did an event with them, just donated some time and coffee, and literally went out and served and just kind of talked about what I was doing. And then I was there 2 years ago, and you saw some of the opioid buzz going on, and there was legislation issues going. They were cutting money and things. And then the past year I was up there, and it was almost overshadowing the alcohol. There was so much talk about the heroin problem, because with heroin, at least with alcohol, it's less toxic to some extent, or less lethal. Let me put it that way.
Yes.
So With heroin, it's a one and done. I actually have a young friend of mine. He's a very talented vocalist and musician. Died a couple of years ago this month. He was in the recovery community, and he got to the point where he felt like things were good. And he went back out, and he was a one and done with heroin.
Wow.
You know, a 28, 29-year-old kid, and in the last couple of years, it seems to have quieted down a little in the region, but there was this wave of insanity where you go to these meetings, and literally every meeting is somebody else, somebody else, somebody else. You know, you're at an alcohol meeting, but you hear about people popping heroin, and so it grew to be a very, very quick and fashion trendy thing for the media to talk about. You know, because it was new and different, kind of like cocaine, and it was a lot of fear around it. Alcohol, most people understand, so that there's some fear, but not a lot, and they kind of understand it. But people don't understand, you know, injecting something into your own arm, and it's just, so there's a lot of fear and a lot of talk about it. And they talk about the numbers, and they are dismally impressive. Very quickly has grown to 30,000. But quite frankly, in the United States, we lose 90,000 to alcohol every single year, and we've been doing that it's been growing for years. So we have triple the amount of people dying from alcohol. Heroin is getting all the press. And the opioid crisis and all of that, I understand it because it's new and different, but every day there's 3 times more already dying from alcohol that we just don't talk about.
And do you feel as though in this budget climate that when legislators are making hard choices between treatments, alternatives and different things, is there I would imagine there's a big difference between recovery treatment for something that's so lethal, such as opioids and heroin, and so highly addictive, versus alcohol. So do you think that it may be that sort of situation is going to pit different recovery communities against each other in some ways, and saying, well, wait, we need the funding too. Don't send all the money to, you know, Narcan funding or something like that. It's got that potential.
It does. I heard people talking in New Hampshire, and they were just saying, we just need beds, and recovery is recovery.
Sure.
And there's a lot of crossover addiction. People start with alcohol, and they've got serious enough issues where they switch over to other drugs or heroin, and try to get off of heroin. So you do see that competing for dollars.
So there's the need for beds.
Yeah.
There's also the need, I'm sure, for better follow-up once people are discharged. Is that your view?
I'm not sure how much is actually done on the opioid side, but that's actually one of the hugest issues with alcohol, is that because it is so normal for people to come in on a Saturday night into an emergency room, wasted out of their minds, struggling probably with deep emotional scars, other serious issues, mental health issues, problems like that. And they hang out there for a couple hours, they'll put some stuff into them and throw them back out on the street.
Because the medical community is sometimes looking at that as just a Saturday night bender.
It's
instead of a symptom of a deeper problem.
You know, but they see a lot of these people over and over and over again, but it's a money thing where they just don't have, there's no insurance there. The hospital's like, we can't afford to pay for all these people. And the state legislatures are saying, hey, we got our $20 million from alcohol sales this year, so they're completely detached from the hospital issues. So you have this, you know, this odd situation where, you know, we got our money, and everyone's struggling across the board. You know, you have, if you just step back and think about it, you have all of the divorces, the psychology care. You have teachers and educators struggling with, you know, kids with addiction problems. There's a whole very, very large swath of people that get affected by one person with an alcohol addiction problem. And it's not until that person either gets convinced, which is kind of hard, or hurts themselves enough that they decide I need to get help, and crawl into the recovery community and get that help.
Sure.
And quite frankly, the doctors and hospitals, and courts will say, go to AA, because it's a free program.
Right. So Peter, how do our viewers find Sober World on the internet?
Just soberworld.org, SOBERWORLD.
And on Facebook?
And on Facebook, it's just soberworld.org, and on Facebook, it's soberworld.org.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming in, Peter.
Thank you very much.
Our guest again was Peter Faulk from Sober World. This has been another episode of the NonProfit World TV show. I'm your host, Donna Hagiga, and the NonProfit World TV show is produced by Sara DeGraff, and it's filmed here at Farmington's Nutmeg TV. Thank you.